This meeting is being recorded.
Hey everybody, welcome to our regularly scheduled working group for multi-tenancy. Today our agenda has a Kamaji project for hard multi-tenancy. We're going to do some introduction and feedback. And then Jim and team will be giving us a docs update on our documenting of how to achieve multi-tenancy within the Kubernetes project. So would the Kamaji team like to kick off?
Dario, we can't hear you well again. I think there's some problem with your audio.
Yeah, pretty sure.
Okay, I can hear that. That was good.
What about now instead?
Much better.
Yeah, that's good.
Thanks God. 2022, the year of Linux on desktop. Anyway, let's listen how it works. So thank you so much for the introduction. And I don't know, I can share my screen. No, it seems not. So can I
hold on? Let me turn on screen sharing.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Try again now.
It should work. That's great.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I'm really happy to be here because at least maybe 2 years ago, Adriano was here in the same meetup or community call or whatever it is, presenting Capsule. And I'm part of Classics. Classics is an Italian startup that is vertical on Kubernetes multi-tenancy. And our first product was Capsule. And Capsule was trying to solve the multi-tenancy, the soft multi-tenancy dilemma. So essentially having multiple namespaces belonging to a single tenant. And so far so good because we received a lot of feedbacks. We had so many contributions and we were really happy. And we started also getting more questions regarding how to address a really hard multi-tenancy. What does it mean? We received some questions by people asking, how can I use my nodes? How can I get the list of validating webhooks, mutating webhooks, or just some other cluster scoped resources? And obviously, with Capsule, with the concept of just namespaces, a collection of namespaces as a tenant wasn't feasible, we were unable to do that. So it pops in our mind this idea of Kamaji. And Kamaji essentially is Kubernetes that is managing Kubernetes. Just joking, but keep in mind that Kamaji is an operator that is going to be installed in a Kubernetes cluster with a custom resource definition that we names config samples tenant control plane. And in this tenant control plane, we are going to specify some options. So it's pretty similar to the nested API, nested cluster API project, because we are going to deploy a deployment with the API server, controller manager, and scheduler inside of a Kubernetes cluster. And it's going to be exposed using an ingress or eventually using a load balancer, a node port service, and so on and so forth. And actually, we are supporting some options. I'd say the default one, at least for having a working Kubernetes cluster, options such as the version, the kubelet cgroup driver, and also the settings regarding the network. So the address, the exposed address, the port, eventually domain, the service seeder block, pod seeder block, and blah, blah, blah. So the idea of Kamaji is to let an operator manage the Kubernetes lifecycle, the Kubernetes cluster lifecycle. And how are we storing the data? I'd like to show you this chart that is going to explain everything. So we got the concept of the admin cluster that is pretty similar to the management cluster that you can have in Cluster API. And we are going to have the namespace scope CRDs of the tenant control plane that are living inside a namespace. And then we are exploiting, although it's a bad term, but we are taking advantage of a new feature introduced in etcd 3.5, if I recall correctly, that is the namespace key prefix. So in the API server, there is an option that allows to use a single etcd data store for multiple Kubernetes clusters. So in the end, we would like to say you can use a multi-tenant etcd, so moving the multi-tenancy solution from the infrastructure to the key value store. And with that said, we are ending up with a Kubernetes control plane up and running in less than a minute, and with an exposed API address that can be used by the worker nodes. If you don't mind, I would like to show you also a brief demo. I hope that the screen is good. So right now I'm using a kind instance. I installed a Kamaji control plane, so kind create cluster and blah, 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 blah. And I installed using Helm. So I don't remember Helm list, all namespaces. Yeah, we got Kamaji and Kamaji system. In the Kamaji system, we got our operator, and then we deploy the etcd multi-tenant cluster. It can be deployed inside the Kubernetes cluster. It could be external. We are not opinionated about that. In the end, we just need the certificates to connect to the etcd and then the API endpoint, or rather the address of the etcd instance. So right now, I would like to move in the default namespace, and I'm going to watch for the tenant control plane, or maybe get tenant control plane watches. Okay. And with that said, we can apply our example. Config samples should be tenant control plane. Yeah. So as you can see here, we got the 123.1. The status is in provisioning because we are generating all the required certificates, all the kubeconfig required for the admin, the scheduler, and the controller manager. In fact, if kubectl get pods, you can see that we got our two pods of the deployment. And if I switch to the containers, you can see that we got the kube API server, then the scheduler, and the controller manager. And now, finally, we got our API our Kubernetes cluster up and running in less than 30 seconds. Obviously, the images were cached, so that's the reason why it was really fast. And how can we access the Kubernetes cluster? So actually, I'm using a kubectl version, and it's pointing to the admin cluster here. I can retrieve the kubeconfig that is stored in a secret. So let me find the right secrets. Get secrets. Should be task admin. Yeah, I was lucky. Kubeconfig. In fact, it is. And with this kubeconfig, although there are some issues because I used the wrong example. Let me fix that. It was Docker PS. Yes, inspect Kamaji control plane grab IP address. And the port was 41443, if I recall correctly. Kubeconfig, GNP kubeconfig, kubectl version. It's a demo. I'm sorry for that, but I should be able to access it. Let me check. I can try to solve it in a glimpse, I'd say. It's core DNS, enable, because I was enable the ingress. Okay, my bad. And it's not service state should be node port, and the address should be this one. Okay. I should be able to access it now. Let me check the address. Okay. I should be good enough, maybe, but let me check. So JQ secret, kubeconfig, tmp kubeconfig, kubectl version. Yeah, it's working. Ah, thanks God, it's working. So as you can see here, we got the correct version. And in the meanwhile, I would like to do this test. So I'm watching every second to get the kubectl version, and I will try to update the internal control plane. And I'm going to switch the version from 23.1 to 23.4. And as you can see here, we are entering in the upgrade status. And it means that we are going to have a new deployment that will be sort of blue-green. It's not going to be rolling. And in a glimpse, we should see 23.4 here, besides the API issues, yeah, the IP tables issues with the kind instance. But we are expecting 0 downtime. And the idea behind Kamaji is that I can also bring my own node. We got a demo. Obviously, I'm running everything on my local machine. But let me enter in classics, Kamaji, deploy kind. We got node join node. So I'm going to export the kubeconfig to the tenant control plane 1. kubectl version is the correct one. Yeah, it's the correct one. And let's issue join node bash. So we are using the correct one. And in a glimpse here, we should see a new container here, classics Kamaji kind worker. So essentially, this is just a kindness node instance, and it's joining the tenant control plane using kubeadm. So now, if I issue kubectl, kubeconfigs, kubectl get nodes -w, I should see a new node joining. Although I think that I messed up the IP address. I am pretty sure I messed up, yeah, because I pointing to localhost. Maybe, yeah, this one. So it's wrong. I should use the Docker IP. Oh my gosh, that's terrible, this demo. I'm really sorry for that. At KubeCon was much better.
These are the joys of live demos, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know Kelsey Hightower always tells the story of his first live demo, and I think that was just to try to get a cluster up and running at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, no
Anyway,
worries.
I can change it. Let me check if I added it. Yeah, it's there. And let's go again. So Docker PS, Docker remove the Wozniak. Sorry for user Wozniak. So let's go again for the JQ, but I don't think that we need that. Let me check. No, we should need that. And it was deploy kind join node. Should be the correct one. Yeah, kind Kamaji, no, absolutely. We have to export the kubeconfig, tmp kubeconfig. Yeah, now it is correct one. And let's go. Docker PS. I just want to check what are we doing here. I'm not so sure it's going to work. Let me check. No, because it's still using the old IP. Anyway, it should work. It was working at KubeCon. So I don't want to waste more your time. So if you have any feedback, if we would like to get more insights regarding project, I'm happy to try to answer your questions.
Jim, go ahead. I've got some questions, but go for it.
Yeah, I think Dario, you said this, you know, is similar to, I guess, CAPI nested, and I was curious to know, like, from your perspectives, what would be the differences, or how would you position one versus another?
I'd say that, honestly, firstly, I have to try to understand better the nested cluster API. And if I understood correctly, there is a sort of sinker. So the idea is to use different API, using an API server deployed inside the cluster that is going to sync some resources in the upper cluster. Instead, if I understood correctly, so if I'm wrong, please correct me, no worries. With Kamaji, instead, we would like to provide a way to spawn real Kubernetes clusters and ensuring that the network and the storage and the node segregation is available at the infrastructure level. Because we had a nice chat at KubeCon with a Google engineer that was asking how we are solving the multi-tenancy issues from the network and the storage perspective. From the network perspective, let's imagine that I'm going to deploy my workload of tenant A in a node where there is also a pod of a tenant B. And if the tenant B, if the pod of tenant B is consuming all the bandwidth, the quality of service is not respected. So our idea from the hard multi-tenancy perspective is to say, let's put infrastructure boundaries and creating different API servers. And these API servers are going to manage using a single management cluster or admin cluster.
So
Okay.
I guess, go ahead. I mean, I had a follow on to that. So I mean, cluster API, right? It deploys a new control plane as well for each cluster request. And I guess I'm not familiar with nested cluster API. I mean, we use cluster API standard with the management node. I think the big difference here is the API server, the control plane is running in the management cluster versus external. Is that the big difference? Or I guess what other pieces are in place?
Yeah, also that. Keep in mind that everything is controlled by the management cluster. The API server is hosted in the management cluster. And the backing storage, the etcd, is using a single instance. Although we are considering some announcements, we got a roadmap, and the idea is to support also additional backing storages. So you can use with Kine, MySQL, SQLite, PostgreSQL as data store, not etcd. And as well, also implementing a pooling of the etcd, because obviously we are aware of the limitation of etcd, 8 GB, and we are going also to plan to benchmark a multi-tenant etcd installation.
And one of my questions was connectivity. So it's cool to see that on the roadmap as well.
Yeah. Keep in mind that connectivity, we discovered that from the infrastructure perspective, obviously, since the control plane is running inside the Kubernetes cluster and the worker nodes could be in a different network, we noticed some issues with the webhooks, the validating and mutating webhooks using the cluster IP. So a solution was using the node port, but it's not so cool having the webhook services running in node ports. So we are working with the connectivity, and we got also Gonzalo that unfortunately is not here due to the time zone. And if I remember correctly, there is a pull request on that, refactoring connectivity. So our idea is to provide connectivity configured automatically. So you don't have to create all the certificates. You don't have to deploy the demo set on the worker nodes and blah, blah, blah. It's going to be exposed. Also because I saw from the documentation that there are so many moving parts with connectivity. The idea is to decrease the operational burden of managing Kubernetes clusters at scale.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
you were asking about the the nested CAPI syncer. I think that the only thing that gets synced, so it also does deploy entirely different API servers per tenant. I think it also deploys etcd per tenant. So it would get around the 8 GB limitation, but of course at the cost of increased resource utilization. My understanding is that the syncer is just for the pods. And it's a pity Faye's not on the call, or at least I don't think Faye's on the call. If you were, you could take over from me now. But I think that what the syncer does is that it is just for the pods, so that basically you create a pod and a child in like one of the tenant clusters. But the tenant clusters, they all look as though they have uniform access to all of the nodes, but of course they can't. There has to be one common scheduler that schedules the pods among all of the tenants. So that's what the syncer's for. It's not for everything in Kubernetes, it's just for the pods. So I think what I was going to ask is, how do you solve that problem? So if you've got, one real cluster with 100 nodes, and then you've got, 10 tenant clusters running on that, how does it allocate the nodes between them, and how does it handle resource sharing within the nodes? Ignoring quality of service, just like basic CPU RAM stuff.
So I guess my understanding though, right, was that the workloads themselves run on worker nodes that you have to bring yourself, right? So
Yeah,
Kamaji is really just providing a control plane with
Oh,
the REST API, and you bring your own workers.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Also because
Okay, so this is control plane as a service, basically.
Yeah. In fact, we are trying to sell. Sorry for the bad word, because we don't want to sell Kamaji, but from the marketing perspective, we are saying that Kamaji could be a nice solution for a control plane as a service, because we saw a lot of potential customers saying that I would like to get a lot of API servers, but running at scale is a pain, because in the end, each production cluster must have 3 control plane nodes, and you have to manage them, and it's not really convenient. I've been an SRE, and I was taking care of 5 production clusters for a gross total of 2,500 nodes, and it was a pain. Although everything was automated, but there is a huge toil behind that. So my idea also with Adriano, that is in listening mode right now, was to say, since operators are really cool because they are eliminating a lot of toil, a lot of operational cost, let manage Kubernetes by Kubernetes itself. So that's the basic design. But now also thinking about that regarding how to place workloads in the admin cluster. The original design of Kamaji is that you bring your own devices. Since it will be used by cloud providers, small cloud providers that would like to provide Kubernetes to their customers. But sorry, go ahead, because otherwise.
Yeah, I see it. That's the big difference between this solution and either nested CAPI or even Loft vCluster, which I don't know as well. I just know what I've read about it. Is that both of those basically subdivide one large cluster up. In terms of the control plane, a lot of it's similar. I think the details are different, as I said, like multi-tenant etcd versus many deployments of etcd. But I think that nested CAPI is also implemented as an operator in the let's call it the parent cluster, what you call the admin cluster. So I think those parts are quite similar in concept, if not in details. And it's beyond my scope to understand which of those differences are essential and which of them are not. They're equally good implementation choices. It might be have you spoken to Faye and the rest of the nested CAPI folks? Because it might be interesting to work to see if there's a way to work together. I know that nested CAPI and vCluster, even though they have very similar goals, they decided not to join forces because there were enough differences in implementation that they didn't want to. And that might turn out to be the case with you as well. But it might be worthwhile talking. I don't know if vCluster has an open source core. It might or it might not. I confess I'm not certain about that, but I'm sure you can look that up. With the nested CAPI folks, because it's got a sort of standard API, the API in CAPI, for creating new clusters, perhaps there would be some way to basically work with them and see if you can extend that model. Even if you end up just sharing information and end up sharing ideas, that might be useful as well. But yeah, I'd encourage you to reach out to Faye. Is Faye's contact information on any of our pages, Ryan, Tasha?
Yeah, well, he's on Slack. You can look at his Slack, and his GitHub handle should be on our main multi-tenancy page.
Cool. Yeah, so he's the person to talk to, and he might be able to give you some ideas about whether it makes sense to work together on any of this stuff. But yeah, to me, that the only sort of like absolutely essential difference here is that this is control plane as a service and not subdividing a cluster.
Yeah.
And I guess some of my questions, right, is, and this is one of the bigger problems I have with CAPI in general is, you now kind of have a single point of failure for every single one of your clusters because your control planes are on a single Kubernetes nodes. Have you, I guess, do you have, backup DR strategies built into this to, basically move a control plane from one Kubernetes cluster to another for various reasons? Or I guess, what are your thoughts around that?
I'd say that it's out of the scope of Kamaji.
Okay.
Yeah, because in the end, everything is here in the multi-tenant etcd, because what you can do is to say, let's say I'm announcing the tenant control plane endpoint using BGP. Obviously, I can try to move the AP to a new pod in a different cluster, but that will require also a replication of the multi-tenant etcd. I'm not saying that it's not possible. Obviously, you can do that, but I think that could be something implemented out of the Kamaji project.
Okay, okay.
Also, because in the end, you just need to replicate the etcd. In that case,
right.
maybe...
So I guess I'm saying, is there a way to replicate out or pull out the, do you have an extraction of like, just grab this, this control plane's etcd keys so I can migrate them? And I guess more or less, is the tenant control plane pod, I guess, aware that, or will it accept a move, or is it locked into that Kubernetes cluster for whatever, reason? And so interesting. Okay. And I guess the other question too is, since it's bring your own worker nodes, are you planning on any hooks, kind of like how CAPI provides for like post QADM hooks or whatever for like upgrades? If I have 1,000 nodes, it's super easy to update the control plane. Are you leaving that to the cluster owners to update their worker nodes themselves, or how's that kind of look?
Well, our idea is to integrate deeply with Cluster API. We got also in our roadmap, because in the end, we saw that there is a resource in the Cluster API that is the control plane reference in the cluster CRD or something like that. So we would like to provide a provider for a Kamaji. So the complete life cycle of a Kubernetes cluster is going to be managed using Cluster API.
Okay, so including the worker nodes then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Also, because Cluster API is doing that. You're firstly upgrading the control plane, then upgrading the worker nodes in a rolling update way, or with blue-green or whatever it is. The idea is to say, I would like to provide Kubernetes clusters to my customers. That could be also internal customers in a big organization, because we saw that it's a huge pattern adopt. And I'm going to use cluster APIs, because in the end, it seems that it's the standard way to manage Kubernetes cluster at scale.
So Dario, currently using kubeadm directly and not Cluster API. Is that the current state, or?
I saw that there are some providers in Cluster API, and they are mostly using kubeadm, besides some implementation with Azure and so on and so forth. Keep in mind that in the Kamaji code base, go mode, we are using kubeadm. Yeah,
Okay.
because we got Kubernetes. Yeah, here it is. And it was a pain, by the way, because kubeadm has not been designed to be used as a library. So we did some dirty acts, but at least it's working. Although the demo wasn't working, but yeah, trust me, it was working.
Okay. Yeah, one other question, if you go back to your diagram, are there any specific networking requirements between the worker nodes and the what you're calling the admin cluster here?
No strictly requirements. The idea is that if I would like to use a different CNI for each tenant, bring my own devices, bringing my own machines or virtual machines, I can do that. Using a single sharded cluster instead, you got some how to say that, are dependencies like the storages, classes, the network, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Yeah, because just looking at this picture, I was thinking of what KubeEdge does, right? Where it tries to put a kubelet on like edge nodes. So I was wondering if you also had an edge use case in mind for this, or has that come up?
I don't know the project, honestly. KubeEdge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there, I think the way they kind of, at least my understanding of it, somewhere in there, there's probably in the docs, there's an architecture diagram, but there's a common control plane and then edge. Instead of putting full Kubernetes at the edge, you would just have kubelets, which can do some independent. It's kind of a kubelet plus plus with some management functions in there.
I can try to take a look to this also to evaluate the differences. Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
That's okay. Okay.
I did have another question too about the control planes. So when I'm on a worker node, and do I have full access to everything that you've deployed in the control plane through in kubesystem or etc. So I can see those pods. Okay.
Yeah. It's like the idea is to mimic the same experience that you can have on AKS or EKS.
Well, so AKS, EKS, right? They hide stuff. There's stuff hidden behind the connectivity or whatever proxy they're using that you don't see. So you don't see the API server, right? Usually. And so that's why I guess where I'm curious. So do I see the API server on as a tenant, or is that kind of hidden away like AKS, GKE, etc.?
Well, the API server, you can see that because right now it's not working. But let me try to delete control plane all. I remember that we had a guide here. My bad. Yeah. It was this one. End of file. Let's see if I can deploy that. And set kube config. So in the end, keep in mind that if I connect to my tenant control plane, I'm seeing this IP, and this IP is required because if I would like to bring my machines, I need access to it. So
sure,
you got full access.
Yeah, you have full access to the IP,
yeah.
but there's the pods running and like the scheduler and all that stuff is usually.
No, they are not considered a spot. They are not considered a spot because if I export this one and export is much better. So get pods -A. There are no pods for the API server or controller scheduler because they are not static pods. They are not running in a node. In fact, if I issue kubectl get nodes, there are no nodes. Now, if I try to issue the fingers crossed it should work. But export keep config. Now I should see when the kubeadm starts. Yeah, now it's working. So yeah, the demo is working. I'm able to see the nodes. Oh, not correct. Okay, here it is. So keep in mind, this is a kind node that is
Right,
joining
sure. Yeah.
control plane, and we are automatically installing the CNI. That's the reason why it's bringing from not ready to ready. But yeah, in the end, the control plane is hidden because it's running as a pod in the admin cluster. It's not a static pod. And what's really fun is that if I issue component status, although it has been deprecated, everything is healthy.
Awesome. Cool.
And that's all, folks. I think that we can wrap up the demo here. So stopping my screen sharing.
Thanks for this. This is actually really cool.
Thank you.
I'm very intrigued.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dario. I think Jim, you're up next for the docs.
Yes, so right, I can post a link to the pull request, or if you want me to share. Okay, yeah, there I have the sharing.
Yeah, if you want to,
pull
sure.
that up. Yeah, so we had it's converted from the Google Docs to this pull request, and I think most of you might have seen it. I think a few people commented and had some suggestions here. So most of the suggestions are accepted. I think there was this one question on whether we should, say something more about anything about pod security and which models pod security is in tune for. So I think this is the one pending comment where I feel it applies to all forms of tenancy. So I don't know if there's anything specific we can call out, but would be interested in getting other thoughts. And yeah, I don't know who else is in terms of the reviews here. We have a couple of looks good to me, I guess, comments here, but maybe as a next step, I was thinking we could even broaden it to some of the SIGs. If we want to solicit specific feedback from a few folks in the community, we can. But the idea would be to then, collect that feedback and close out the PR. So,
Okay. Did you need anything from me? I remember seeing something about, I just glanced over the original pull request. There was something about a drawing needing to be redone. Is that urgent?
So I had redone it in PowerPoint because I didn't have then when I copied it from the Google Doc, it didn't, the resolution was a little bit, fuzzy. So I just redid it in PowerPoint and saved as a PNG. I think the suggestion was to use some different tool, like an SVG tool. And I took a quick look, but I didn't understand how to do block diagrams in that. It seemed more like this tool was for flow charting or for other diagrams. So
why don't we leave it as is for now? I'm sure it's okay, and then we can always improve that later.
And as for the open comment, we talked about this in one of our meetings, I thought, and we added that kind of blanket, make sure to partner with your security team, et cetera, as kind of the catch-all for that. Right.
Yes, I think that's the current kind of security is just called out up front and said, it applies to everything. So, and in fact, security is more relevant, of course, or more critical if you're looking at multiple tenants sharing the same cluster. So, but yeah, I don't know what else we would want to say here other than, of course, security is important in any form of tenancy. I guess the only thing could be if you're using isolated nodes, or if you're using completely different worker nodes, then maybe some of the well, even then, I mean, you still want
Yeah.
pod security, right? So I don't know when you would say that pod security is not required or less important.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to add a comment if you think it'll be helpful, but I mean,
Sure.
okay.
Yeah, no, that would be good. And yeah, I don't know, like what else? So I know there are a few folks on the docs team, like I think it's Tim, as well as I believe somebody else did a review. But is there anybody else from the community, from SIG Security or SIGAuth, that we want to request a review from?
I mean, it might be worthwhile to have, send it to like Jordan or something, just because
Yeah,
technically
Jordan.
SIGAuth is our, our sponsor, SIG.
Okay.
Yeah, Jordan was going to be my suggestion as well.
Okay.
Jordan
All right.
did it.
Yeah, I can reach out to him and ask if he can do a quick review and see if he has any pointers or suggestions.
And then, yeah, I mean, we could even just pop it into the SIG security Slack channel, maybe just to see if anyone's interested. I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm happy to do whichever. Just let me know.
All right. Do you or anyone else on the call attend any of their meetings, or?
I don't.
Not in a long time.
I don't. Okay. Yeah, I haven't in a long time either. So yeah. All right. So then I'll just add to the Slack channels and request reviews there. And feel free to, if anyone else has any other suggestions or stuff, or just if you want to chime in on these comments. Most of the suggestions that were there I've accepted. Yeah, but if there's anything else, just feel free to add to the PR.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
By the way, I did put this in, and we were debating at one point where to put this, right? So I put this into the security section itself, which I felt that's where it best fit. But again, open to suggestions, of course. If you go in here, where did security go? There it is. If you expand security, then there's multi-tenancy shows up in here.
Yeah, what were the other options? The other options I think were either in configuration or cluster administration.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, there were trade-offs with each one, and so I felt.
What else is in cluster admin? I thought that was the one that I was kind of leaning towards.
So there's things like, yeah, there was managing metrics, logs, certs, things like that. There is some, discussion on APF here, which, yeah.
Yeah, it's got advantages and disadvantages. I would vote if we're voting. I'd vote for cluster admin, but I also don't feel wildly strongly about it.
I think I would tend to lean towards security, but I don't think we've written it to be security centric, and so I feel like that would be, I guess, my concern is. Yeah, I guess like cluster admin is kind of what we wrote it towards, or how it's worded. And so, but yeah.
Only there were some way that we could insert a link into multiple places.
Yeah, that'd be too easy.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if we'll get any other, nobody pointed that out yet. So let's see if we get any other feedback. I'm happy to move it as well, right? So, I mean, as long as it's in the doc somewhere, that was the goal, right? And easy to find. Okay. All right. So yeah, that's really all I had. Let me know if there's anything else. Otherwise, in the meanwhile, I'll reach out to Jordan as well as post on a couple of SIGs and try to solicit some more feedback.
Yeah.
Sweet.
And we lost Tasha, but we have some action items for Jordan, the PR that needs to get fixed up that Tasha owns. So he may mention that when we reach out. So we need to get that done for him as well. Right. Yeah, I tried to at least correct a few things in there, but seems like there's still some other issues which are blocking the PR from the test from passing. Right. Okay.
All right. If that's it, we can call it.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks Dario
Take
for
care.
the
Bye.
demo, and thanks Jim for the update. So
Yeah.
Thank
All
you
right,
for the
very
time,
bye.
Ms. Man. Bye bye.
take care. Bye.